board meeting, we had a discussion about community engagement and the formation of the subcommittee. This is just an update on the 2 meetings that we've had so far. And we spent some time in the first meeting laying out, what this committee's role was specifically. And you can kind of see that on the sheet, on the report update to develop a recommendation to the full board about how to design and implement an effective community engagement process and whether or not the district has capacity to manage the work. We also talked about community engagement. What does that mean for the purposes of this work? You can kind of see that there. But really, there's a component of this that if we're looking at this seriously for the future, honestly thinking about our options, the budget situation that we're in, digging into the purpose behind this. It's important to be communicating with our community for sure, but at the end of the day, our options moving forward really come down to making reductions, more reductions, or asking the community for support via a referendum. So I think there's a part of this where we have to get really honest about the purpose of the community engagement. Because just doing community engagement for community engagement's sake may not really be something that especially internally, we can invest that much energy into. We talked about the purposes of kind of what goes into a good plan, and then we spent some time talking about getting some help from the outside, especially as it relates to if we're going to be taking steps towards potential community ask. So I don't know, board members on the committee, if there are things you want to jump in on and kind of extrapolate on or extend about the committee's discussion so far. Again, this is just an update.
I can jump in. I think the couple of things when in the section of what we hope to accomplish with the community engagement, specifically, those pieces are really important. I think one, and the top one is one of the most important, our own school funding clarified, because I think there's the level of knowledge of how schools are funded on this board, it's not even at the level that we probably need it to be, let alone the whole community. And so how do we continue to help share insight and clarify how schools are truly funded? Because there are just so little levers on how to make changes, and just helping the community understand that there may be misconceptions that we can help clarify that I think are really important. Obviously, the legislative challenges that are out there, and then really trying to understand, those things. I think there's at the end of the day, it's the community schools, and we have to put out in front of them what do we want this to look like. Do we want to go down the path of ask to maintain and or grow our capabilities at Grand Rapids, or do we want to continue to cut? And I think at some point we have to just be real with ourselves and say, what do you want to do, community? And the way you do that, I think, is eventually through the voter box.
So one of the things that came up in talk, if we're not going to run a referendum, we might as well start talking right now about what the cuts are going to be next spring, because we know we're going to be there, and it's probably a good time to engage the community to find out what parts of the school are important to them. It's kind of obvious that without a referendum, we're not going to look the same. There's going to be things that go away. I think it's also pretty evident that if we don't run a referendum this fall, it doesn't make sense to run one the following fall 26, we would never pass a referendum in a general election year. And so if we make the decision not to run a referendum, we're making it for probably a 2-year period at least.
We can't afford to do that. We can't afford not to have a referendum go this fall and then think that in 2 years we'll be okay. And also we have to remember that, yes, this is the community schools. However, what is the community willing to let go of and put at risk? Like, meaning we have a lot of people in this community who might have the advantage of just picking their families up and leaving and going to a completely different school district that offers all of the things that we want to be able to offer to our students. And we've already had some community members that have left and because of that. And so if we aren't willing to, and that's everybody in the community, and I understand, you know, financially it's rough. However, if we're not willing to invest in our youth and in our students, then what are we willing to invest in? And if we're not investing in our teachers and our staff, then what are we willing to invest in? If we're not willing to invest in our children's programming, you know, the question just keeps going on. And then what does that look like for our community later on down the road? We won't have a community left because there is no public school system to be attached to it. And therefore, why are people going to be here in the first place? You move for a good job, but you also generally move because there's also a really good school district attached to that job that you're moving to. But if you don't have one of those, then why would you move your family somewhere? So, you know, these are all just questions that we really have to think of. And we just have to kind of keep in mind that it's a tough question, but at the end of the day, it's a decision that we are probably going to have to make at some point in time. And then also remembering that on the legislative end, even if we wanted to do a referendum to receive funding, if that bill goes through for the recreational property tax, that's still a referendum that we would have to pass in order to even get that funding. So there's just a lot of communication, right, Dave, that we'd have to give out to our community just to make sure that they're understanding exactly what that looks like. What does that all mean? What does that mean for them at the end of the day that they're putting into? And the bottom line isn't just money, it's their kids and their children's education, and what are they willing to not have at the end of the day when their kids get into the high school or when their kids get into the middle school? What are they willing to lose? What are they not willing to lose? Those aren't great questions to ask people, but those are real questions that we have to ask people. So
I think one thing too, when Mark talks about 2 years, like, money doesn't come to the district immediately. When you as a board approve the levy in December, that authorizes the collection of revenue the following calendar year. So we don't start to see those funds the school year we don't see the funds in the year that a referendum passes. So, you know, if we push off a vote for 2 years, we're really pushing off funding for 3 years.
I'll be honest, and we gotta be careful about talking about that too, because I mean, people know votes get pushed through at off times, and it really makes them mad then, you know, and in my mind, if we have the merit for what we're doing, we shouldn't be worried about when it's going to vote. It's got merit behind it. People, and I think that's where we are right now. That's where we need to be ultimately, because we've already got bulldozed over on the last one. And if people are going to be looking for it, to be honest, and it's just going to make them mad. I think we got to be completely upfront on it, honest with them, and like Melissa said, we got to get the backing grassroots from the community on it, or it doesn't have a chance, honestly. I really believe that.
One of the things that we talked about, I think that was good was just, the difference between somebody who would support a referendum and someone that would advocate for it. And we had thousands of people that voted in support of this, but we didn't have a huge group of people advocating for it. And that was, that was one of the things that was an Achilles heel for sure. We had, from a turnout perspective, we had a higher than average turnout. Usually it's a 30 to 40% turnout in an election like we ran, and ours was well over 40. So that was a good indication that people were engaged. But we really lacked that grassroots group of supporters that were willing to advocate for it.
And that comes down to what Tom is saying and what Dave is saying. Like, Tom is right that we would need to have that grassroots support. Dave is also correct in saying that the communication needs to be so extreme that we're just like talking it to death and answering questions over and over again, and just like making sure that everybody, I mean, for lack of a better term, everybody, but that everybody is understanding, everybody hears it, everybody knows and is aware. And like Tom is saying, making sure that they're at least comfortable in understanding why we're running a referendum or why we need to run a referendum, and what does that, where does that start at on the grassroots end?
So a lot of our discussion is that type of communication in the subcommittee. A lot of the discussion is that type of communication something that we can do internally, or that we should be either buying a block of hours from somebody, or diverting our radio funds, or whatever it might be, or taking on a full contract. But it is a pretty heavy lift to do internally. Whichever way it goes. I always caution the board not to get into the weeds too far on reductions. I mean, our job is more to say we need this reduction, this amount. But I am feeling more and more like, as we go forward, we probably need to give Matt some guidance. We don't need him standing out there by himself, taking the full brunt of, look what they're doing to the district. That's what the board is for. We don't want to get into the weeds, but it's probably our job to go out and say, this is what the community is telling us they need to see in our schools.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think if we are gonna reduce, they're gonna have to be, it's not a partial full-time equivalent, right? It's gonna be kind of looking at a program and saying, well, we gotta let this program go, or whatever it is. I don't know that program's the right word, but it's gonna be a loss of a feature, for lack of a better term, that we're just gonna say we've got to sacrifice this. We're at that point, because we can't do it in a way that makes sense, or that it has any value at that low of a, and unfortunately, that's what happens with, and I'm not trying to, but that's what happens with businesses when they get into that recession, right? You got to come back to your cores, find where your core competency is, strengthen up on it so that you can then expand again. It's just kind of the natural cycle of business. Sometimes you start getting all over the place and trying to be everything for everybody, and all of a sudden, but it's never easy. Not looking forward to it, that's for sure.
The kind of the goal of the subcommittee was to come back to this and report to the board. And I think actually we'll probably have something on the agenda at the next board meeting. What is the 19th?
Yeah.
19th. And I think any productive discussion we have here tonight, would definitely factor into what we do on the 19th.
Mark mentioned it, getting some support, external support, and the idea of buying a block of time. And I had a chance to follow up with Jeff about that idea. And I think that probably in our case makes a lot of sense, where we're not committed to an entire project. There would still be some scope that would be defined, but it would be more of us accessing that expertise for planning perspective when we reach out, when we want to use that or access that time. And Mark mentioned we do have some current advertising budget that we could redistribute or divert towards the cost of that, if that's something the board wanted to look at, kind of from a net budget effect standpoint. So I feel like as a superintendent, that would be money well spent. We have for a business with a $60 million budget, I have a very part-time communications person. That's it. And that's pretty tough when we're talking about engaging, a community our size. And, we won't see that tonight, but in one of the slides I share with our community when I'm out doing these roadshow things is just the complexities of a district the size of Delaware with 30 townships and 2 tribal nations. And, it's a complex system that we're in. So I'd certainly be looking for that kind of help. But if there are ways to design it that give us options, I think that's always a good thing.
Would we be looking to make some sort of motion tonight to approve a block of time, or are we waiting until next week?
We typically wouldn't vote on a proposal tonight.
At a workshop.
Okay. So we typically would do that at a board meeting.
I think it would be helpful to at least put it on the agenda then, because we'd be able to come back as a subcommittee to report out and share, what the recommendation would look like.
I think it would be appropriate for this group to tell the subcommittee to come back with a proposal on the agenda at the 19th. I don't know what people think about that.
Yep. And I don't know that it helps anybody or a thought process of any sort, but we would not be, if a referendum is discussed, we wouldn't be the only district attempting that this fall. Deer River is also doing a referendum. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's $1 million, Mark, right? I think possibly, if I'm not mistaken, that's what their
What their cut is.
That's what
they're
their
looking
cut
at
is,
a
I'm
cut.
sorry, yes, that's what they're trying to cut, and so, again, they're trying to pass a referendum in order to help ease all of those financial burdens, but and I say this because I'm a parent, again, I have 4 kids. I am at my red line. I am tired of my kids missing out by just a hair on everything. Everything. My kid is in high school and she misses everything by a year, and I am so over it. I will also say that I'm in a position with my family personally that I would put money into that. And I get that not everybody in our community is in that position, but I also go back to the fact that why do we have children in a public school if we are not willing to invest in them, and if we're not willing to invest in those teachers that are teaching them? Why do we have families here then? For what? What is the purpose? And I'm getting fired up about it because, again, I am tired of my children missing out. I'm over it. I'm over it. I'm one of those families that we talk about in this room when we talk about families voting. I'm one of those families. Those are my kids. So I get it. And I also understand the decisions that have to be made that are really, really tough. And then just all of the stress that puts on every single human that lives in Grand Rapids, fully aware.
Well, as a superintendent, and I've shared this with individuals, but you know, this is a great month because you get out and you're able to see a lot of these neat things happen. And we had in the last couple of weeks have had a number of academic awards things, scholarship nights. You know, I was at the academic awards ceremony at Grand Rapids High School, and I was sitting there thinking to myself as the superintendent, I don't know that there are some of the things that we're celebrating tonight. I don't know that we're going to be able to do anymore if we don't get this. You know, if we don't get more revenue. I mean, we can't cut our way to. We can't cut our way to the kind of district that I want to be the superintendent of. I'll just say it plain as day. I don't want to be the superintendent of a shoestring school district. That's not why I came here. I want to be innovating, and I want to be taking care of people, and I want to be giving kids world-class opportunities. I think our district has the potential to be that. But there's going to have to be some, you know, sacrifice. There's just no way around that. And so, yeah, I want to win here. And our staff, you know, we've been very open and forthright about negotiations coming up. We need our people to want to stay here too. You know, they deserve that, and so that's a part of this too. We have a reputation, and I want to make this a destination not just for people, for kids, but for people that want to
Teach our kids.
great job and a great place doing great things. And I don't think we can cut our way to that.
And I think the committee needs to come back to us with strength. I think the community's head right now, and we all see it, is in the wrong place. They are thinking the school can just cut its way, and can't. And that needs to be very, very clear. It needs to be enunciated, and we need to give the opportunity to the community to step up. We can't just complain and say, well, we made a bunch of cuts because we didn't think. We need to be out there forthright and say, this is what's going to happen. The only way around this is this, or we can bring all the Nashwauk students and build our numbers.
They get a brand new school. They're not going anywhere.
And that, again, grassroots, all the communication.
And think about what we as board members can and should and ought to be doing and how we can go about that. I think we all have a responsibility to carry this message and to be very clear with the community. And how do we go about that?
And I would even argue that the time is now. There's no reason that we have to wait for anything to be able to help our community understand the situation we're already in.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, if not everybody watches these amazing meetings with this amazing group of people around the table, but some do. And then for those that don't, if we're having conversations, we should be sharing this status and where things are and what does that mean for them. What's the legacy that we have? Because I think Matt's job now, if we come back and we say, no, Matt, hold the line, cut, it's going to be experience changing cuts, not because all the fat, if you will, has been trimmed. And now we're getting into a part where we're cut muscle. So now what? What's that going to look like? And I can tell you that there's a lot of programs here that people feel very, very passionately about,
Absolutely.
myself included, that will be in the chopping block because that's just how it is. So the community gets to decide, do we want to keep it or not?
We need to be clear.
Right. And that's where I think Mark's point was, if we go into something like this saying, okay, this is what's on the table, I think that can spur some dialogue too, to get people to think through what does that really look like? Not as a threat, but as a reality, because that's where we're at.
So committee coming back on Monday with kind of communication, correct?
We'll put together a proposal to put on the agenda.
Thank you. Thanks for the work you've done already. So
So
very
important,
impressive.
lots on the line.
All right, the next item on the agenda is to approve going into closed session according to Minnesota statute 13D.03 labor and negotiation strategies. Do I have a motion to go into,
So moved.
moved by Ashley? Do I have a second? Second by Dave. Julie, can we? Well, I guess we'll do a little discussion first. Is there any discussion? Julie, can we have a roll call?
David Marty,
Yes.
Dave Collins,
Yes.
Ashley Goodman.
Yes.
Tom Gustafson.
Yes.
Charter.
Yes.
So give me a minute, I'm gonna stop the recording.